The UK has downgraded a warning to its citizens against travel to the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Britain, the United States, Canada, and Australia had last month issued separate advisories to their citizens against all but essential travels to the city and its surrounding areas over fears of possible terror attacks. The US had gone further to order the evacuation of its diplomatic staff members. The travel warnings prompted a strong response from the Nigerian authorities, who described the alerts as unnecessary and irresponsible. On Monday, the UK High Commission in Nigeria said the travel advisory to British citizens for Abuja has been changed from amber to green. In a statement, it said the UK government no longer advises against all but essential travel to the city, but that some risks remain. It added that the warning against all travel to several other states in Nigeria remains unchanged. Let us now try to get some insight on these stories by speaking with Dr. Chika, Mordi, adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and chairman of United Capital PLC. He's in Washington, D.C. Great to have you, Professor Mordi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Obati. Always a pleasure to watch your programs.
Well, the Democrats seem to have defied their gravity to put in the midterm elections best performance in the last 40 years, and clearly the best midterm elections performance in the last 20 years since George W. Bush. Even if President Biden is not on the ballot, we have seen him jubilating there. Let's start with the significance of this victory, particularly now that the Democrats have taken Nevada and even Georgia. On December 6th, the runoff may even still go the way of the Democrats.
It is seismic. It has profound ramifications for the Biden agenda. So if they had lost the Senate and the House as well, then he would have been hamstrung in pushing through whatever policies or whatever he was trying to enact in the House. And they would also have spent a lot of time making life difficult for him with, impedimenta, possibly some sort of impeachment or repeat impeachments and things of that nature. By winning the Senate, what that does is at least inoculates him against certain things, and it also helps him push some elements of the agenda. Equally important with that in the Senate is the margin of victory. So should they win in Georgia, then the things like the power sharing and how the committees will work will favor the Democrats. Even if they don't win in Georgia, they will now have the status quo, which is where the vice president has to pass a casting vote where it's stuck. For the House, the margin by which should they lose, which it appears like they would lose, is currently something like 205 to 211, and there are 19 outstanding seats to call. So should the Republicans take over the House, it will be by a very narrow margin. So anywhere between 3 and 10 seats, depending on who you believe. And what that means is it leaves very little leeway for the likely speaker, should they win, Kevin McCarthy. Just 2 defections or 3 defections, and it turns every move on its head. So it's a very, very good day for Democrats. It's a good week for democracy as well, because one of the less spoken things about this election was that the U.S. was at crossroads. So the last almost 2 years, since the election of 2020, many have spent time denying the election, discrediting it, and with claims that were unfounded, that somehow the president wasn't legitimately elected. And many of those people were actually on the ballot in positions where they could run the elections, because here in the U.S., the system is that the states run the elections with their own sets of rules and constitutions. And that could have been a real threat to democracy.
Well, President Biden has been saying, look, this is a confirmation of the fact that his policies are good and that the Americans are happy with the policies of his administration, regardless of the impact of inflation and all the other issues. But one major loser in this election is a man who is not even on the ballot at all, and that's Donald Trump, who has been blaming everybody, including members of his family, for the poor performance, as it were, of the Republicans. And clearly, the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, seems to be the next favorite, or clearly the favorite, in the next general elections for the Republicans. What do you say to this fall of Trumpism? Can we say that?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. There are three elements to the question you asked now. I think, obviously, former President Trump is not happy about the events. And by the way, his daughter got married yesterday, as this was also coming into Lebanese Nigerian at Mar-a-Lago. And so maybe some sort of congrats will be in order. He wasn't happy with the outcome for obvious reasons. Trump's endorsement used to be the most sought-after endorsement in the Republican Party, and he lined up candidates who ran in very critical offices. 16 of them in statewide races in what were considered battleground areas. All 16 of 17 all lost their elections. So his endorsement was like a kiss of death. The one exception was Ohio, where J.D. Vance won the Senate race. And that in many ways is considered is very much a red state these days. So Trump's influence in the party has definitely waned. Now, at the same time, DeSantis' star is rising, his stock is rising. Does that mean he will supplant Trump as the candidate for 2024 for the party or the head of the party? I doubt that very much. His star is rising, but Trump is still clearly the most popular and influential person in the Republican Party. And the nature of those primaries are very plural. So Trump does not need to get to even 40% to win the primaries. The other candidates will split the rest. Now, is this the end of Trumpism? It depends on how you define Trumpism. If, in many ways, DeSantis himself is a full subscriber to Trumpism. He has very few policy differences with former President Trump. He's just that he's a different person, and maybe he's not as acerbic and immoral in his conduct and in how he plays his politics, if you like. But in many ways, it subscribes to all the elements of Trumpism. So Trumpism is still very much the organizing principle of the party, and until the party goes back to clear conservative principles that are and decouple themselves from Trump's definition of what things are, Trumpism will still be very much alive.
Okay, we usually don't hold midterm elections here in Nigeria. Our system is different, but an electoral process is an electoral process. Now, as Nigerians, we've been keeping an eye on the situation in the United States in these midterm elections. Do you think there are lessons so far that we can learn from how those midterm elections have been conducted?
Yes, there are indeed lessons. I mean, there are structural differences. So the Nigerian, as you know, probably better than me, being a lawyer, the Nigerian political system is modeled after the United States system, but there are still fundamental differences, there are structural differences. For example, what you just mentioned, the elections here for the House, and it takes place every 2 years, as against 4 years here, where all general elections happen. And the second thing is Senate takes 6 years. And then the way the elections are run, they're run on a state-by-state basis. So yes, we have state INEC in Nigeria, but it's still, you have uniform rules across board on how elections are run. That's not the case in the US. But having said that, there are lessons to learn. And the lessons to learn here are that you see a lot of integrity, a lot of patriotism, a lot of resistance to powerful influencers in this last election that just happened. It would have been very easy for people to buckle over. People were facing death threats. There's a lot of intimidation, but the guardrails held. The legal system held. Even people who were appointed or who have sympathy for certain parties did not reflect that in most of their judgments. And the officials who were charged with running the elections, they lived up to it. They moved to the law, and they did not waver. And that's something to learn from the INEC. There's going to be a lot of political pressure. There's going to be a lot of attempt to induce people with, pecuniary, with money, they should be patriotic enough to stand up. And people get rewarded when you have integrity and you stand up against pressure.
Well, let me go back to Donald Trump. I mean, the plan was that this week he was going to announce his interest in the 2024 presidential race. But now he has had cause to postpone it till after the runoff in Georgia on December 6th. And yet you say he's still the biggest factor. Is he not a diminished godfather in the Republican Party? And you say DeSantis himself is, a disciple of Trumpism. Well, but he's shown some confidence to be able to stand up to the godfather. Can we correctly say that, Donald Trump himself is beginning to have doubts about the possibility of his getting onto the ballot in 2024?
I very much, I would push back on that. I think, first of all, Trump is running for multiple reasons. It's not just about becoming president again. Part of why he's running beyond his well-known ego is he's trying to ward off legal challenges. He's facing multiple investigations and cases, and it's very likely he's going to get indicted. Now, if he becomes president or if he's running for office, he believes that there'll be some political inoculation because the DOJ, the Department of Justice here, is reluctant to get involved where they're political issues. And if you're running for office, they typically would stay away from you. So he's running because he sees that as a way to protect himself from the many cases he's facing. But going back in terms of his prospects in the Republican primary, again, I believe he's the front runner. Trump has a scorched earth approach to politics. If anyone stands up against Trump in the party, Trump is going to go after that person and try to eviscerate them, in every way. And you come out of that battle bloodied and bruised. And DeSantis is 44 years old. He can wait for 4 more years. He can wait for 8 more years. Should Trump lose the next election, he becomes the almost alternative, if you like, candidate. And if the kind of political calculus he would do, I'll be surprised if DeSantis announces he's running for president. If I were to guess, I would say he'll probably wait out Trump. And if Trump burns out, either because he's not going to be on the ticket for legal reasons, then you see DeSantis emerge, or if he loses to whoever the Democrats put forward in 2024. So I think Trump is still the organizing factor of the Republican Party, and it will take a while for that to change.
Okay, let's have a conversation quickly around international affairs. About 2-3 weeks ago, the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and some other countries issued security alerts that Nigeria was not safe, particularly the Federal Capital Territory. But only this week, the UK mission, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the FCDO, had issued an update to say, well, Abuja is safer now, but risks remain, and that 22 other states in Nigeria, their citizens in Nigeria should be careful where they go to. But this has caused some back and forth within the Nigerian authorities and the foreign missions in Nigeria to say that, look, you don't issue a security alert against Nigeria to cause panic inside Nigeria, when in fact, specifically, in the case of the United States, that even Nigerians in the United States, they don't feel very safe because we're always hearing about gun violence in the United States. I mean, you teach international studies. What do you think of this and the latest development?
Okay, so first thing I would say, I'm not an expert in this security, this part of this dimension of it, and I would not claim to be. I read and get data and information that you probably have access to, some of it even on the Rise TV, and your sister publication, the state newspapers. But what I would say is that the U.S. authorities are very sensitive when it comes to threats of violence against American diplomats. If you remember, in 2012, I believe, Ambassador Stevens was killed in Benghazi, and that since that incident, there's been increased sensitivity about security. Now, having said that, and let me just say that what the US thinks matters a lot, because the capabilities in terms of information gathering and the rest of it that the US has is significantly above that of most Western embassies and diplomatic missions in Nigeria. So they also look to the US. And if the US takes a position, you're likely to see that position repeated by Canada and many European countries and Australia and the rest of them. But I was going to say that despite that, there is almost they're on equal standards when it comes to the security judgments. So yes, Nigeria there's a lot of precarity in Nigeria. There's some gangs and obviously criminals across some large parts of the country, and you have some ISWAP, Boko Haram, and the rest of it. But having said that, there's still some sort of double standard. So let me give you an example. If you think of Mexico, where you have cartels around large swaths of the country, and where you have incidents where public officials and the rest of them are killed routinely, they don't have the same sort of threat warnings. They don't elevate it to the level that you saw happen in Nigeria. If you look at today, we had an explosion in Turkey. There's a bomb explosion a couple of hours ago. And there are some countries where there's a real risk of violent activity or some threats to people. You don't see the same kind of elevation happen. So there's a political dimension to this, is what I'm trying to say. There's a basis, but perhaps it's a bit exaggerated.
Well, on that note, I would like to thank you very much, Professor Chika Mordi, for joining us here on the This Is Live, the Sunday Talk Show.